Previously on Break the Cycles. After crossing over to Guatemala and with a few days of excursion in the rural areas of the north, we're back in civilization in Guatemala City. After a few days' break with our respective hosts, me and Wyndham decided it is time to head into El Salvador. Well, there's no real timeline for the trip. There are some weather limitations that we have to account for. Summer in South America is not the same season as the summer in North America. Well, North America, June and August is the main summer season. In South America, that time is December to February. And while it is mid October now, that only leaves us November, December, January, and February. So 4.5 months. You have to get across all of Central America and all the way down to Ushuaia. So similarly, just heading to Alaska, we had to be there during summer because even at the end of summer, temperature can be as low as the 30s. Now that's around like 1 or 2 degrees Celsius or 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. When you're riding a motorcycle, you have to account for wind chills. If you're riding in around 40 degrees temperature and if you're riding at around 55 miles an hour, it's going to feel like 25 miles an hour, which is already below zero. And in 30 minutes, you could potentially get frostbitten. Not to mention that it's just the traveling speed of the bike. It doesn't account for actual wind speed that's actually blowing or the humidity of the temperature and how that, feels. And the winds of Patagonia are known to be some of the harshest in the world. So while there is no real timeline, we have to make it there before summers end if we want to have an enjoyable experience heading down to Ushuaia. Next day, we headed out of Guatemala City towards El Salvador border pretty early. The city roads are pretty decently maintained. The traffic pattern is, I would say, slightly more predictable than Mexico. The roads were pretty good until, of course, we left the city limits. Then there are potholes everywhere, varying sizes, and if you really don't want to crash or bend your rim, you really have to kind of slow down. We made it to the border town of Ciudad Pedro de Alvarado at around 1 p.m. This is like beginning of our real Central America border crossing experience since the Mexico and Guatemala one didn't really count. First, we parked our bike and a bunch of people tried to help us for a fee. So we dismissed them and Wyndham and I went to the counter to ask to do the paperwork. The paperwork's pretty easy. You need a few copies of your passport, a few copies of your ID, as well as your motorbike title and this form that they ask you to fill out, and they also need 3 copies of that. There is a printer. It's sitting right behind the counter agent. Like, they gave us the form, I see the printer behind them, but they cannot make copies for you. So they say you have to go across the street all the way around the corner in this plaza and this store. They'll make copies for you at the tune of $1 per copy. But I already had a bunch of copies because I knew that I'm going to need them. So the copy of my title, passport, and all the stuff I already have. But I still need 3 copies of the form that they gave me to fill out. It's absolute racket. So this printing place is kind of out of sight from the vehicle. The good thing I was with Wyndham because one of us can go and the other one stayed with the bike. So about 40 minutes of waiting to get copies, doing paperwork, we finally move across the border to the El Salvador side. So then now we have to do the paperwork on the El Salvador side, and guess what? The same bullshit. You go to some building far away, make copies, haggle with them on the copy price, and bring it back, blah, blah, blah. But we did. We finished our paperwork, we headed towards the border checkpoint. So basically, you do your paperwork at the building, and then you ride forward a little bit, and there's a checkpoint where these officers look at all your paperwork, make sure that it's all, done, and you have it done, and then they'll let you through. When we got there was a lot of people because it was like a cargo truck in front, so they have to do very detailed look into the cargo truck. So we had to wait. So as we're waiting, it started to rain, and then it started to rain heavier and heavier. And we're kind of like ducked out of the way, but then we realized the rain wasn't going to stop. So Wyndham and I just put on our rain suit and just stood there waiting. Before it got to us, the rain started coming down like out of this world. Like it's just deluge of rain coming down. And finally, after a good 30 minutes of just waiting in line, it was finally our turn, and they let us through. We already had a location in El Salvador, so my neighbor back in the U.S., Noah, really good friend of mine, is from El Salvador, and his niece actually lives in the town past the border in Carasucia. So we already arranged a meetup in a local gas station right after we passed the border crossing, and then they can take us there. But man, this rain was coming down. Of course, as you would expect in any developing country, there is no rainwater management. The water flooded the road. We were pretty much riding in a small stream, like constant stream across the road with mud and everything washed out from the side, just like coating the entire road. And this went on for like 15 minutes before we actually reached the gas station. And once we got to the gas station, my neighbor's niece showed up. It was still pouring rain. We followed the car for another 15 minutes before we finally arrived at their place, and we were absolutely soaked even though we had our rain suit on and everything. At least the boots were dry, but everything else was wet. The following day, I did some minor service on the bike and replaced my Zumo GPS mount that had broken because Noah actually shipped me a spare unit. These units are really funky, the older units, and the mounting base like cracked. So I replaced it with the one that was shipped and a bunch of little parts that came from the US as well. We discussed with Noah's niece's boyfriend, now husband, that we can leave our bikes at their house, kind of like take a break from riding. This seemed like a good idea at the time, but it turns out to be an epic mistake because while we were able to take a break from motorcycling, we did not have any basic transportation. So if we wanted to go anywhere, we ended up either walking or having to call a cab. It was very inconvenient and wasted a ton of time for transportation. Anyways, the following day we headed out on a sightseeing tour. We first stopped at Cafe Albania, which is a very niche like coffee farm with a maze. It was drone friendly, so I took some shots. Then we headed to a ruin in the middle of the city called Tazuma, and the ruin site was surprisingly accessible, and they didn't care if I flew a drone either, which was kind of weird. It was like middle of town, but the site was much smaller than the Yachilan, and it's not nearly as like impressive, but it's still pretty cool. Next, I made a pit stop at Santa Ana. This is actually a Christian youth missionary place that I stopped at. I met Mr. Socks on the way to Alaska near Thunder Bay, and we had a brief conversation during that time, and he told me that his son will actually be in El Salvador in Santa Ana, and doing this Christian mission group, and I said, okay, cool, and when I stop by, I'll go and say hi since I'm gonna be headed that way anyways. So I did, and at the end of the day, I met up with Wynnum, and we ended up in a hostel in San Salvador. We spent the night in the hostel in San Salvador and visited some food places and some breweries, and then finally we visited some buildings at night. We walked around, etc. The following day, we took a cab that took us to El Zonte, a very popular surfing destination. We booked 2 nights at the surf camp and also booked some surfing lessons. Now, El Salvador has some of the world's best waves for surfing. The waves come constantly and the water is nice. It was just fantastic if you are good at surfing. Now, if you suck, like me, then you run out there and then you fall off your board and you get pounded by the waves, and then you try to get up and then you get pounded by the waves again and then again and then again and again, and then you drink a ton of seawater. It was It was rough. So as the day wind down, one of the guys that we were chatting with online, Ian, showed up because he was also riding south. This is a different Ian Horan. So he came to the surf camp to meet up with us. We had some drinks and decided that traveling in three is also better than two. So Ian agreed to meet us at the Honduras border crossing in a few days because we had to go back to get our bikes and from Carasucia. The following day, we returned to Carasucia, prepped our bikes, washed our laundry, got ready for the next leg of the trip. We left early the next day because we will be attempting to cover nearly 300 miles and crossing over into Honduras. We already decided that we would try to skip Honduras because there was a lot of civil unrest near when we were passing through at that time. So we decided that a one night stop in town and then we can head out will probably be the safest bet for us. Wyndham and I took off going south towards the border. The ride to southern El Salvador was sketchy at best. The roads are very narrow with street vendors in the middle of the road in many places. Tons of people just hanging out in the middle of the road. When we stopped at a food place in Pollo Campero, we had to tip the guy in the parking lot to make sure that our bikes were not going to be messed with when we go inside for this fast food restaurant for like 20 minutes. As we continued down south, there were many livestock that were also using the same road. And they were all over the road, both lanes. Animals are very unpredictable because you have no idea which way they're going to turn. So either you ride past them or you honk at them. You don't know if they're going to turn into you the second you pass them. So it was kind of sketchy. Fortunately, we arrived at Honduras border without much drama and we met up with Ian. We ended up doing paperwork ourselves again. Since there were three of us, it made it a lot easier. It was still a ridiculous process. You go into one building, and then you get sent to halfway across the road to make some copies and pay some ridiculous price for the copies, and you haggle for the copies, and then you come back, and then it's such silliness. So the three of us ended up riding all the way till nighttime, and we ended in Chuluteca. After dinner, we did not feel comfortable camping given the local issues in town, so we decided to ask the local fire station if we can camp out behind the gates. They agreed to let us throw a tent up in the yard, and that's how we ended our day. Next time, we rode up an active volcano in Nicaragua with an incredible bat cave.